In this video, to kick off the section, we're going to explore a new tool that we'll be making heavy use of as we create the Task Manager application. This is the very popular NPM module called Mongoose. Now, Mongoose is directly related to MongoDB, and it's going to allow us to do some of the things that we don't know how to do so far. For example, we know how to use MongoDB to create documents, read documents, update, and delete them. But what about other equally important things? For example, how do I set up validation for my documents, defining which fields are required and which are optional, and what types of data I expect for them? For example, I don't want someone to be able to set that completed field equal to a string. I want to require that it's a Boolean. Now, with Mongoose, we can also do other things we're not able to do. For example, how do we say that a given task was created by a user? Eventually, we're going to add authentication to the Task Manager application. Now, if me, user 1, creates a new task, I don't want some other user, like user 34, to be able to read that data and see the private task I created. Mongoose is going to allow us to get all of those new things done while still being able to perform our basic CRUD operations on the MongoDB database. Now, before we integrate anything into our project, let's view Mongoose in the browser. You can find it over at mongoose.js.com, and the reason I'm bringing you here is to just show you where you can learn more. They have a pretty decent set of documentation, and for the moment, what I want to do is just quickly go over this 5-line example down below. Now, it's okay if this code's no longer here. Maybe they updated the site and got rid of this example. You can just watch along as I quickly give you an overview of what Mongoose is going to let us do. So Mongoose right here is just connecting to the database, and the next thing it does is it creates what's known as a model. A model allows us to model something in the real world that we want to be able to store in the database. So this could be a user or a task, or in this case, a cat. If we were creating an IKEA website using Mongoose, we could model the various pieces of furniture that we're selling, including their names, their prices, dimensions, and any other attributes we might have. So we create models for all of the collections that we want, and then we use the model to describe the data. Now, in this case, for this basic example, there's almost nothing to the model, there's no validation, and there's nothing fancy, which we'll explore shortly. All they're doing is saying that a cat has a name, and the name should be a string. We'll learn how to customize the models further as we progress through this section. Now, down below, what do? They create a new instance of a cat. Right here, they have the kitty variable, which stores that new instance, and they set the name equal to the following. Then down below, they use various methods on that model to manipulate it. So right here, they use kitty.save to save the data, and this provides a much nicer interface for interacting with MongoDB. Instead of needing to use all of the low-level API methods, which we explored, we'll be able to use methods that make a bit more sense when we're writing code, like save. Now, Mongoose falls into a broader category of tools known as ODMs, and ODM stands for Object Document Mapper, and as that name suggests, the goal is to allow you to map your objects in your code, so for us, objects in our Node.js application, over to documents inside of the MongoDB database. And that's exactly what Mongoose is going to let us do. So let's go ahead and get started with Mongoose by heading over to Visual Studio Code, installing it, setting it up, and working through a basic example. I'm going to navigate over to VSC, and we're going to run the npm install command from the terminal. Once again, make sure you have navigated to the Task Manager directory. That's going to be npm I mongoose at the latest version 5.3.16. Now we're going to go ahead and run the installation command, and while that's running, we can start the process of setting up the real directory structure we're going to end up using. To explore MongoDB at a basic level, We did all of that in just a single file. The Task Manager app, though, is going to get much bigger than any of the applications we've built so far, so we want to make sure that we do take into account a directory and file structure that allows us to scale the application out to its complex, large size without having everything in a single file. So right here, we're going to start by creating a new folder that is going to be the source directory, and this is where the application source code will live. And for the moment, we're going to create one more directory and one file. Inside of the source directory, we're going to create a DB folder, which is where we'll store things related to the database, and we're going to add just a single file inside of there, and we'll call that mongoose.js. Inside of here, we're going to mess around with the basics of Mongoose, and we'll continue to use Mongoose as we build out the Task Manager API. To start, let's go ahead and load Mongoose in. So I'm going to create a Mongoose constant. Then I'll go ahead and use require to load in the Mongoose NPM library. And once we have that require call in place, the next thing we do is use mongoose.connect to connect to the database. Now, mongoose.connect is pretty similar to mongoclient.connect. We are going to provide the connection URL as the first argument, and we are also going to provide that options object as the second argument. So remember, Mongoose uses the MongoDB module behind the scenes, so everything we do in Mongoose is playing off the abilities of this library. So everything we learned about in the last video is completely relevant to Mongoose. Right here, we'll provide our URL and we'll provide our options object. Now for the URL, it's going to be just slightly different. Everything starts off the exact same way. So it's MongoDB : / then our IP 127.0.0.1, followed by a colon for the port 27017. Now this is the exact URL we have over here. The one change we're going to make is that we don't specify the database name separately. Instead, we provide that right in here as part of the connection string. For us, that's going to be / followed by the database name. In this case, I can use Task Manager API. Now notice I did pick a different name than the database we already have in place, as the Mongoose data is going to look different. So right here, we have that connection string in place, and now we can move on to the options, and we are going to configure use new URL parser exactly like we had before, and once again, we will be setting that to the Boolean true. Now there's one more option we're going to configure, also setting to true. That is use create index. This is going to make sure that when Mongoose works with MongoDB, our indexes are created, allowing us to quickly access the data we need to access. So right here, this is all that it takes to actually connect to the database. Now we can focus on the fun stuff, which is to define our very first model. Together, we'll define a basic version of the user model. Then as your challenge for the video, you'll be defining a basic version of the task model. Now I'm saying basic version because as we progress through the next couple of sections, we'll continue to improve and build out these models. Eventually, they'll all live in their own files, and there'll be a lot of code associated with them to do all sorts of interesting things. For now, though, we're going to start with just the bare bones minimum setup. The first thing we need to do is define the model we're working with, and as mentioned, we'll be creating the user model together. So right here, we'll make a new constant called user with an uppercase U. Then to actually generate this, we use mongoose.model. And mongoose.model accepts two arguments. The first is the string name for your model, and the second is the definition where we define all of the fields we want. Now for our purposes, we will call this a user, once again, with an uppercase U. And now we can determine what fields we want to have. For now, let's go ahead and set up something like a name and an age for each user. That's exactly what we had in the last section when working with just the MongoDB NPM library. To do that, what we do is we set up all of those fields as properties on this object. So I'm going to set up name, whose value will be an object, and I'm also going to set up age, whose value is also going to be an object. And in here, we configure things about that field. We can configure validation, we can set up custom validation, but at its most basic, we can set up the type for the fields we're working with, and that's exactly what we're going to end up starting with. So to get this done, what we do is we set up a type property on each object. So right here for name, we're going to set the type equal to a string, right here, uppercase string. Then down below for age, we'll be setting this equal to a number. So the type will be uppercase N number. So here I'm just using the constructor functions from JavaScript as the value for type. Now, Mongoose supports plenty of other types as well for things like booleans, dates, arrays, binary data, object IDs, and more. But these are two basic types that we'll be using to get started with. Now that we have our model defined, we can create instances of that model to actually add documents to the database. So down below, if I wanted to make a new user, what I would do is first create a variable to store that user. I could just use something like me, any name would work. And right here, we use the new operator with our user variable, which is a constructor function for that model. So it's new, uppercase U user. We call this as a function, which it is, and we pass to it an object with all of the data for this particular user. So for me, I would set name equal to my name, a string matching up with the type for name up above. And then I would also set up age right here, setting that equal to a number. Perfect. Now we have an instance of our model created, me, but at this point, nothing's actually getting saved to the database. To save to the database, what we do is we use methods on our instance. So on here, we have methods for doing all sorts of interesting things for those CRUD operations. In order to save the model instance, what we do is we use the save method. Now the save method doesn't take any arguments, it's simply saving the data that we stored, and this returns a promise. So we can use our two promise methods, which we've explored pretty extensively at this point, to actually wait for the saving process to finish. Right here, then to register a handler for when the promise is fulfilled, and then down below, .catch to register a handler for when the given promise is rejected. In a minute, we'll actually trigger an error to make sure this catch handler does run when we have invalid data. So I'll grab error and we'll make sure to dump that. Down below, console.log, I'll print the string error to start. Then as the second argument, I'll just dump the variable to the terminal. Up above, when things go well, what we get access to is our model instance once again. So that would be me from right here. I can choose to name it, but since it's the same thing, I could always just access the existing me, which I already have. Right here, console.log, and I'll just dump me to the terminal. So what are we doing? We're defining a model, we're creating an instance of it, and we are saving that instance to the database. Let's go ahead and test our work. I'm going to save mongoose.js and run it from the terminal. Make sure you still have your MongoDB database running in that other terminal tab. Right here, I'll kick things off by using clear to clear the terminal output. Then I'll use node source /db/ mongoose.js. I'm going to run the file. It's going to go through the process of saving that user. And what do I get back? I get back our document. I have my ID, I have my name, and I have my age all showing up. Now we also have one additional property added and managed by Mongoose. This is __v. This stores the version of the document, and right here we are starting at 0. Next up, we're going to head over to Robo3T and view our data. Now remember, we created a brand new database when we're working with Mongoose. If I right-click the connection and click refresh, I can see that show up just down below. I'm going to close the tabs for the other database. I'll then right-click it, and we can actually drop that database, removing it completely. The only one we're going to need is the Task Manager API database. If I crack that open, we have our collections, we have a users collection, and if I open that up, what do we have? We have the one document which we just explored. Right here, I have the exact same fields and values which I saw over inside of the terminal. Now that we've seen things go well, let's watch things go poorly. To show this off, what I'm going to do is mess up the age value. So age needs to be a number. We're going to make it not a number and we'll rerun the file. Right here, I'm going to set up a string and I'll just put something in like the name Mike. Perfect. Now we can save mongoose.js. We can rerun the file down below, and what we're going to see is a very long object printing. The long and the short of it, though, is that this is a validation object, letting us know that things went wrong and describing what exactly went wrong. And we're going to explore validation more as we progress through these sections. For now, I just wanted to show you that when we do use Mongoose, we do get a base level of validation from the start, and we can customize that as we progress. For example, I could say that you need to be an adult, so your age needs to be greater than or equal to 18, or we could validate your email, making sure it has all of the correct components. So that's actually where we're going to stop for this video in Robo3T. If I do refresh the data, we'll see we still just have our one document. The other document we tried to create was invalid, so Mongoose did not let us create it. Now, I said there was going to be a challenge where you'll create the task model. This video ran a little longer than I wanted it to, so I'm going to push that back to the next video. I'm very excited to get to it, so let's go ahead and jump right in.